This inspection is happening. Now move.
You're not stepping past me.
Try and stop us.
The sound hit me first, not the gulls or the waves, but the mechanical grind of an engine where no engine should be. I was standing barefoot on the weathered dock of my private island, coffee mug warming my hands, watching the sun bleed orange across Puget Sound. 3 years I'd owned this place, 12 acres of old-growth Douglas fir, rocky shoreline, and a restored 1920s Craftsman that had cost me every penny of my software company exit. Worth it. Every dawn like this one proved it. But that sound didn't belong. I set down my mug and listened. A boat motor, outboard, maybe 150 horsepower, coming from the Southwest Channel, the narrow pass between my island and the mainland subdivision of Harbor View Estates. The water there ran shallow and tricky. Locals knew to avoid it unless they knew these rocks intimately. The boat appeared around the point. Not a fishing vessel, not a pleasure craft. A rigid inflatable with Harbor View Cho Patrol stenciled on the side in aggressive block letters. My jaw tightened. Standing at the bow like some nautical conquistador was Linda Parkwell, president of the Harbor View Homeowners Association. Even from 200 yards out, I recognized her posture, shoulders back, chin elevated, one hand shading her eyes as she surveyed my island like she was calculating its value. Behind her, a younger man in a reflective safety vest operated the outboard. In the back sat 2 others, a woman with a tablet and a barrel-chested guy holding what looked like surveying equipment. They were heading straight for my dock. I stayed most years. I'd learned that stillness revealed more than action. People showed you who they were when they thought you weren't paying attention. The boat slowed as it approached, the driver cutting the engine and letting momentum carry them the final 20 feet. Linda didn't wait for them to tie off. She stepped onto my dock with the confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times, her deck shoes making crisp sounds on the sun-bleached planks. "Good morning." Her voice carried that particular frequency of false cheer that some people mistake for authority. "You must be Mr. Donovan. I'm Linda Parkwell, HOA president for Harbor View Estates." I didn't move from my position 15 feet up the dock. "I know who you are, Mrs. Parkwell. What I don't know is why you're on my property." Her smile held. "Oh, we're just doing our quarterly shoreline assessment, making sure everything's in compliance with county regulations and HOA standards." HOA standards. I let the words sit there. This island isn't part of Harbor View Estates. Well, she glanced back at her crew, who were now climbing onto the dock with their equipment. The woman with the tablet was already photographing my boathouse. That's actually a bit of a gray area we're hoping to clarify today. The coffee had gone cold in my hand. I set it on a piling. "There's no gray area. I have a deed. This is private property. You're trespassing." Linda's smile finally cracked, replaced by something harder. "Mr. Donovan, I've been managing this community for 8 years. I've dealt with dozens of property disputes, zoning, conflicts, and non-compliant homeowners. What I've learned is that cooperation makes everything easier." She pulled a folded document from her windbreaker. "This is a courtesy notice that Harbor View HOA is conducting an environmental impact survey of all properties within our jurisdictional waters." Jurisdictional waters. The phrase was so absurd, I almost laughed. You have no jurisdiction here. According to county records, the original Harbor View development included maritime access rights to all waters within a half-mile radius of the mainland properties. Your island sits at approximately 0.4 miles from our nearest dock. She held out the document. "We're not trying to cause problems. We just need to ensure your property improvements haven't negatively impacted the shared waterway." I didn't take the paper. "When did you file this survey notice with the county?" Her pause lasted 1 second too long. "We're filing today. This is preliminary." "So you're conducting an official survey without official approval, on private property, without permission." I pulled my phone from my pocket. "That's interesting." The barrel-chested man with the surveying equipment stepped forward. "Look, buddy, we don't want any trouble. We're just doing our jobs." "Your job," I said quietly, "is on my dock, without my permission. I'm asking you to leave. Now." Linda's expression shifted completely. The corporate friendliness evaporated, leaving something colder underneath. "Mr. Donovan, I don't think you understand the situation. Harborview HOA has considerable resources and legal standing. We've successfully resolved numerous property disputes in this area. If you refuse to cooperate with a reasonable environmental survey, we'll have no choice but to pursue more formal channels. Formal channels? You mean lawyers, if necessary. She stepped closer, lowering her voice like we were suddenly conspiring together. But it doesn't have to be adversarial. The truth is, several HOA members have expressed interest in, shall we say, expanding our community amenities. An island like this, properly developed with appropriate community access, could add significant value to every property in Harborview. There it was. The real agenda, wrapped in bureaucratic language. They didn't want to survey my island. They wanted to take it. I felt something cold and familiar settle into my chest. The same feeling I'd had in boardrooms when investors tried to squeeze me out of my own company. The same feeling I'd had in court when my ex-wife's lawyers claimed I'd hidden assets. The feeling that came right before I stopped being polite. "Let me make sure I understand," I said, keeping my voice level. "You want to turn my private property into an HOA amenity, and if I don't agree to let you survey it, illegally, I might add, you'll sue me." Linda smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "We prefer to think of it as resolving an ambiguous property situation for the benefit of the entire community." The woman with the tablet had moved further down the dock, photographing my boathouse from multiple angles. The surveyor was setting up a tripod near my storage shed. I looked past Linda to the driver, still in the boat. He was young, maybe 25, and he wouldn't meet my eyes, just doing his job. Probably had no idea what Linda was really planning. "You have 30 seconds to get back in your boat," I said. Linda laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Or what? You'll call the police?" "Mr. Donovan, the county sheriff's marine unit is stretched thin. They won't send a boat out here for a property dispute. And by the time they do, we'll have documented everything we need." She turned her back on me and called to her crew. "Susan, make sure you get photos of the dock pilings. They look recent. We need to determine if they required permits." Something in me went very still. She had no idea who I was, what I'd been before I bought this island, what I still was, technically, when the county called and asked for help. I pulled my phone out again and made a call. It rang twice. "Donovan." The voice on the other end was gravel and coffee. "Didn't expect to hear from you this early." "Morning, Sheriff. I've got a situation at the island. HOA crew from Harborview conducting an unauthorized survey on my property. Trespassing, refusing to leave. I've asked them 3 times. A pause. "HOA patrol boat, Linda Parkwell running point?" "That's affirmative." Jesus Christ. She tried this same stunt with the Morrison property last month. "Hang on." I heard papers rustling. "You're still commissioned?" "I am." "Then handle it. I'll have Collins swing by in the patrol boat in 20, just for show. Remind Mrs. Parkwell that we take property rights seriously in this county." "Copy that." I ended the call and looked at Linda. She was watching me now, a small frown creasing her forehead. "Sheriff's on his way," I said. "You've got about 2 minutes to leave voluntarily before this becomes a formal trespassing complaint." She scoffed. "You really think the sheriff's going to drop everything and—" I reached under my shirt and pulled out the badge I still wore on a chain. Not every day, but some mornings when the water was quiet and the island felt too isolated, I liked the reminder that I was still connected to something larger than my own property line. The star caught the sunlight. "Harborview County Sheriff's Department, Special Deputy, Marine Division." The color drained from Linda's face. "Now," I said, my voice dropping into the register I'd used for years when making arrests. "I'm going to explain this one time. This is private property. You have no survey rights, no environmental authority, and no jurisdictional claim. You've trespassed, refused to leave after being asked, and attempted to intimidate me with threats of legal action." I glanced at the surveyor and the woman with the tablet. "Your crew has 30 seconds to pack up and get off my dock." The surveyor was already moving. He grabbed his tripod and headed for the boat. Linda's mouth opened and closed. "You can't. We have rights as community representatives. You have the right to leave, voluntarily, or I can arrest you for criminal trespass and detain you until the patrol boat arrives." The woman with the tablet was already in the boat. The driver had started the engine. Linda stayed frozen for another few seconds, her face cycling through fury and calculation. Finally, she stepped toward the boat, then turned back. "This isn't over," she said. "You think a little badge gives you authority? I've been building this community for 8 years. I know people, county commissioners, zoning boards, lawyers who specialize in property disputes. You just made a very big mistake." I didn't respond, just watched her climb into the boat. They pulled away, the outboard churning white water as they headed back toward Harborview. Linda stood in the bow the entire time, staring back at my island like she was memorizing it. I watched until they disappeared around the point. Then I picked up my coffee mug, still cold, and walked back up the dock toward my house. The morning had started peaceful, beautiful even. Now it felt like the opening move in a game I hadn't asked to play. But Linda Parkwell had no idea who she was playing against. She saw a tech guy who'd bought an island to escape. She didn't see the years I'd spent working Marine Patrol before the startup, the investigations I'd led, the property theft cases I'd helped prosecute. She didn't see the cameras I'd installed along every shoreline approach, the motion sensors in the woods, the detailed records I kept of every boat that came too close to my property. Most importantly, she didn't see that I'd bought this island for one very specific reason. I was done letting people take what was mine. As I climbed the steps to my house, my phone buzzed, a text from Sheriff Hendricks. "Collins is en route. Let me know if you need anything else. And Donovan, document everything." I was already ahead of him. The cameras had captured the entire encounter. I looked back at the water, now empty and peaceful again. This wasn't over. Linda had promised that much. But she'd also given me something valuable, confirmation that this wasn't about surveys or environmental impact or community benefit. This was about power and property, and someone who'd gotten used to winning deciding my island would be her next victory. I smiled, cold and thin. She had no idea what she'd just started. You won't believe what happens next. 3 years ago, I'd paid $3.2 million for 12 acres of forested rock in the middle of Puget Sound, and everyone thought I was insane. My realtor called it unmarketable. My financial advisor called it illiquid. My ex-wife called it typical Michael, running away instead of dealing with reality. Maybe they were all right, but the day I signed the deed, standing on this same dock while the seller, a retired Boeing engineer named Dale Hoffman, handed me a brass skeleton key to the house, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Dale had owned the island for 40 years, bought it for $30,000 when Puget Sound property was still affordable and private islands were considered eccentric rather than exclusive. He'd built the Craftsman House himself, cutting and milling the timber from the island's own Douglas firs, hauling materials across the water on a barge he'd welded together in his garage. "You'll be good to her," he'd said, gripping my hand with calluses that spoke of decades of work. "She needs someone who understands what she is." "What is she?" I'd asked. "The last place in 100 miles where nobody can tell you what to do." That had sold me more than the property report or the structural inspection. I'd spent the previous 5 years building a software company from my garage to a $50 million acquisition. 2 years before that, I'd worked Marine Patrol for Harborview County, responding to boat accidents, water rescues, and the occasional property dispute. I'd liked the work, the solitude of the water, the clear boundaries of law enforcement, the sense that you were protecting something that mattered. Then my dad got sick. Cancer, aggressive, expensive. My sheriff's salary couldn't touch the medical bills, so I'd quit, started coding, and spent 5 years sleeping 4 hours a night to build something I could sell for enough money to take care of him. He died 3 months before the acquisition closed, never saw the money, never knew it was coming. After that, the money felt hollow. The buyers wanted me to stay on, run the company under their corporate structure. I lasted 6 months before the meetings and metrics and middle managers made me want to drive my car off a bridge. That's when I found the island. Dale showed me everything that first day. The house, solidly built with old growth timber that would outlast anything modern construction could produce. The spring-fed well that provided clean water year-round. The generator shed with a backup system Dale had engineered himself. The trails he'd cut through the forest. The rocky beach on the north shore where seals hauled out to sun themselves. The eagle's nest in the tallest fir. Harborview development went in about 20 years ago, Dale had said, gesturing across the channel toward the mainland. Started with 30 houses. Now there's 200. Every year they get a little more organized, a little more official. He'd looked at me seriously. They've asked about the island. Twice. Once wanted to partner on developing it into community mirage. Another time they wanted to conduct a wildlife survey, said they were concerned about water quality. What did you tell them? Told them to get the hell off my property. Dale had smiled. They backed off, but they'll try again. People like that always do. They see something beautiful and they can't stand that they don't control it. I'd thought he was being paranoid. Now, standing in my kitchen 3 years later watching surveillance footage of Linda Parkwell's boat approaching my dock, I understood he'd been warning me. I pulled up the HOA website on my laptop, Harborview Estates Homeowners Association, professional design, polished copy about community values and protecting property investments, photos of waterfront homes, manicured lawns, a community dock with matching sailboats. At the bottom of the Board of Directors page, Linda Parkwell's photo. Professional headshot, real estate background, 8 years as president. Underneath, a bio that made my stomach tighten. Under Linda's leadership, Harborview HOA has expanded its jurisdiction from 30 to 200 plus properties, successfully resolved 47 property disputes, and increased average property values by 38%. Linda specializes in community development, land use optimization, and complex negotiations. 47 property disputes. I clicked through to the news and updates section. Press releases about community improvements, new docks, expanded beach access, a maritime common area established through negotiation with, I read it twice to believe it, a neighboring private property owner who generously agreed to shared waterfront access. I pulled up county property records and searched for that address. The transaction history showed a family had owned it for 30 years, then sold it suddenly last year to Harborview HOA for 60% of its appraised value. I dug deeper, found a legal notice in the county archives. Harborview HOA versus Patterson Family Trust. Lawsuit filed. Settled out of court. Property transferred 3 months later. Linda hadn't negotiated. She'd litigated. My phone rang. Unknown number. I considered letting it go to voicemail, then answered. Mr. Donovan? A man's voice, professional but uneasy. This is Robert Chen. I'm an attorney with Cascade Property Law. I've been retained by Harborview HOA to reach out regarding your island property. That was fast. 4 hours since I'd kicked Linda off my dock. I'm listening. Mrs. Parkwell has asked me to communicate that the HOA is prepared to make a very generous offer for your property. $3.8 million, well above the current market appraisal. All closing costs covered. Flexible. Timeline. My property isn't for sale. I understand, but the HOA is also prepared to offer alternative arrangements. A shared use agreement, for example, where you maintain ownership but allow limited community access to certain areas. The HOA would handle all maintenance and liability insurance. You'd receive annual compensation and, not interested, a pause. Mr. Donovan, I should inform you that if we can't reach an amicable agreement, the HOA is prepared to pursue legal remedies. There are several potential claims regarding maritime access, environmental compliance, and, let me stop you there, Mr. Chen. I'm guessing Linda didn't mention that I'm a commissioned sheriff's deputy with maritime jurisdiction, or that your client committed criminal trespass on my property this morning, or that I have video documentation of her threatening legal action to intimidate me into compliance. The silence stretched longer this time. I was not aware of those details. I'd suggest you ask your client for the full story before you file anything, because if Harborview HOA sues me, my first motion will include that video footage and a countersuit for harassment. I'm sure the county prosecutor would be interested too. I see. He sounded like he was recalculating everything. Perhaps we should table this discussion for now. Good idea. He hung up. I sat back, staring at my laptop screen. Linda had called a lawyer within hours, offered nearly $1 million over my purchase price. She was moving fast because she wanted this resolved before I could organize a defense. Her problem, was that she'd made assumptions, that I was just another property owner who'd fold under pressure, that I wouldn't know how to fight back. She was about to learn different. I spent the rest of the afternoon pulling records, county filings, HOA meeting minutes, Property transactions in Harborview going back 10 years. A pattern emerged. Linda had steadily expanded the HOA's jurisdiction by acquiring private properties, pressuring owners to sell, or filing nuisance lawsuits until people gave up. Each property became part of the HOA's maritime common area, which gave her leverage to claim the next property. My island was the last private holding in the area. If she got it, she'd control every piece of waterfront for 2 miles. It wasn't about community benefit, it was about empire building. My phone buzzed. A text from Sheriff Hendricks. Collins swung by your island. No activity. Linda Parkwell filed a formal complaint against you for brandishing a weapon and threatening HOA personnel. Sending me her version of events. Want to give me yours? I smiled coldly and sent him the surveillance video. 5 minutes later, he called. Jesus, Donovan. She just lied to me in an official statement. That's what I figured. I'm dismissing her complaint. But watch yourself. She's got money and connections. This is going to get ugly. It already is. After we hung up, I walked outside. The sun was setting, painting the water gold and copper. From my deck, I could see the lights of Harborview Estates starting to glow across the channel. 200 houses, all paying HOA dues to Linda, all giving her the resources to hire lawyers and surveyors and make problems for anyone who stood in her way. I thought about Dale Hoffman, who'd built this place with his own hands and defended it for 40 years, who'd sold it to me because he believed I'd do the same. I thought about my dad, who'd taught me that sometimes the only thing between you and losing everything was being willing to fight when everyone else told you to give up. And I thought about Linda Parkwell standing on my dock this morning with absolute confidence that she'd win because she always had. The water was calm, the island was quiet. Tomorrow, I'd start building my defense. But tonight, I stood on my deck and looked at the home I'd built, the peace I'd found, the last place in 100 miles where nobody could tell me what to do. Linda Parkwell wanted to take it from me. She had no idea what that was going to cost her. The certified letter arrived on day 3. I was replacing planks on my dock. 2 boards had rotted through last winter, and I'd finally gotten around to ordering marine-grade cedar when I heard the distinctive rumble of the mailboat. Greta Samuelson, 72 years old, delivering mail to the handful of private islands and waterfront properties the post office couldn't reach by road. She'd been running this route for 20 years. Got something official for you, Michael, she called, cutting her engine and drifting up to the dock. Needs a signature. I pulled off my work gloves and signed her tablet. The envelope was thick, expensive paper. Return address. Cascade Property Law. You in some kind of trouble? Greta asked. She'd known me since I bought the island, had known Dale before that. The mail route made her the de facto intelligence network for anyone living on the water. HOA trouble, I said. She snorted. Linda Parkwell? You know her? Everyone knows her. She tried to get the county to make me stop delivering to private islands, said it was enabling non-compliant property owners. Like I work for her instead of the federal government. Greta shook her head. Woman's got more ambition than sense. You watch yourself. After she left, I opened the envelope. 23 pages. Legal motion filed with Harborview County Superior Court. Harborview HOA versus Michael Donovan. Complaint seeking declaratory judgment regarding shared maritime access rights. Temporary restraining order preventing me from interfering with legitimate community environmental surveys. And damages for harassment and intimidation of HOA personnel. The harassment claim nearly made me laugh. Linda had turned the dock confrontation into a story where I'd brandished my badge in a threatening manner and used my position of authority to intimidate volunteers conducting a peaceful survey. No mention of trespassing, no mention of refusing to leave, no mention of her threatening to sue me first. But it was the declaratory judgment claim that worried me. She wasn't just suing for damages. She was asking the court to establish legal precedent that Harborview HOA had maritime access rights to waters surrounding my island. If she won, she'd effectively control my shoreline. I photographed every page and emailed them to Sheriff Hendricks with a note. This is what weaponized litigation looks like. His response came back in minutes. I'll pass it to the county attorney, but civil court is outside my jurisdiction. You need a lawyer. I did. Problem was, Good property lawyers in this county were expensive and mostly worked for wealthy clients like HOA boards. Linda had deep pockets. I had a one-time software payout that was already 3 years depleted, but I knew someone who might help. James Thornton's office was a converted boathouse in Bellingham, 40 miles north. I'd worked with him 5 years ago on a case involving stolen moorage space. Someone had been forging permits and subletting county dock slips. James had been the prosecutor. After he'd left the DA's office to start his own practice, we'd stayed in touch. "Let me get this straight," James said, reading through the complaint. "Linda Parkwell tried to claim maritime access rights to your entire island based on..." "What? The fact that her HOA exists?" "Based on her winning 47 previous property disputes," I said. "She's building precedent. Every property she takes gives her legal ammunition for the next one." James flipped through the pages, his expression darkening. "This is SLAP territory, strategic lawsuit against public participation. She's not trying to win. She's trying to drain your resources until you settle. Can we fight it?" "Oh, we can fight it. Question is whether you can afford to." He named a retainer figure that made my stomach drop. Property litigation gets expensive fast. Discovery, expert witnesses, depositions. If this goes to trial, you're looking at 6 figures minimum. I felt something cold settle in my chest. "So she wins by default, because she has more money?" "Not necessarily." James leaned back in his chair. "Linda's overplaying her hand. This complaint is aggressive, but it's thin. The maritime access claim has no legal basis. Your deed is clear, but she's betting you'll fold before we get to that point." He smiled. "The thing is, I really don't like bullies, and I've got some flexibility in my billing. If you're willing to do the legwork on discovery and documentation, I can keep my hours reasonable." "What kind of legwork?" "Every HOA meeting minute for the past 5 years, every property transaction, every lawsuit she's filed, every settlement agreement." He tapped the complaint. "Linda's running a pattern. If we can document it, we can show the court this isn't a legitimate property dispute. It's harassment." I thought about my dad, working double shifts at the plant to pay for my college, never asking for help, never backing down. "Let's do it," I said. The surveillance footage proved Linda wasn't giving up. Over the next week, boats appeared near my island 4 times. Not the HOA patrol boat. That would have been too obvious after our confrontation. These were private vessels, circling my shoreline slowly, photographing. One came within 50 yards of my dock. Each time, my motion sensors captured them. Each time, I documented the date, time, and vessel registration numbers. On day 8, I was working in my garden when I heard voices, not from the water, from the forest. I froze, listening. 2 people, maybe 3, moving through the woods on the east side of the island. Not trying to be quiet, branches snapping, casual conversation. I grabbed my phone and headed toward the sound, moving silently the way I'd learned on Marine Patrol. Years of sneaking up on illegal campers and drunk boaters had taught me how to walk without noise. They were near the property line markers Dale had set up decades ago, iron posts with private property signs every 50 feet along the eastern shore. 3 people, 2 men and a woman, all wearing Harborview HOA windbreakers. 1 man carried a GPS unit. The woman had a camera. They were surveying my land. I watched from behind a cedar trunk, recording on my phone. They spent 10 minutes documenting the property markers, taking photographs, marking GPS coordinates. "Linda wants a complete map of the property line," one of the men said. "She thinks there might be encroachment issues with the original survey." "Encroachment from what?" the woman asked. "There's nothing around here but water." "That's the point. If the original boundary survey was even slightly off, we might be able to claim the HOA's maritime access extends onto the island proper." My jaw tightened. She was looking for survey errors. Any technical mistake in the property description that she could exploit in court. I stepped out from behind the tree. "Morning." All 3 jumped. The woman dropped her camera. "This is private property," I said calmly. "How'd you get here?" We came by boat," the man with the GPS stammered. "Mrs. Parkwell said it was okay to..." "Mrs. Parkwell doesn't own this island. I do, and you're trespassing." "We're just doing a survey," the woman said, recovering. "We have authorization from the HOA to..." "The HOA has no authority here. I'm asking you to leave, now." The man with the GPS looked uncertain. Look, we're just volunteers. We were told this was part of the community waterfront assessment. It's not. And if you're not off my property in 5 minutes, I'm calling the sheriff. They left, stumbling back through the woods toward wherever they'd beached their boat. I followed at a distance, watched them shove a small inflatable into the water and motor away. Back at the house, I emailed the video to James with a note. Third trespassing incident in 8 days. She's testing boundaries. His response: she's building a case for adverse possession. Document everything. And Michael? Consider installing gates at your dock. If she can show regular access without objection, it strengthens her maritime rights claim. I spent that afternoon building a locked gate at the top of my dock, posting new "No Trespassing" signs, and installing 2 additional cameras with live feed to my phone. That night, I sat on my deck and watched the lights across the channel. Harborview Estates, 200 properties, all funding Linda's campaign to take my island. My phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Mr. Donovan, this is Susan Chen from Harborview HOA. I was on the boat last week. I wanted to apologize. I didn't know we were trespassing. Mrs. Parkwell told us you'd given permission for the survey. I'm really sorry. I stared at the message. An apology from one of Linda's own crew. I texted back, appreciate that. For what it's worth, I believe you. Linda has a way of bending the truth when it serves her. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. She's telling everyone you're a troublemaker trying to block community improvements. But after watching how she handled that confrontation, I don't think that's true. I'm probably going to quit the volunteer board. Another ally. Small, but significant. If you ever want to talk about what she's planning, I'm here. I sent. No pressure. Thank you. I might take you up on that. I looked back at the water, at the lights of Harborview reflecting on the dark surface. Linda thought she was isolating me, thought she could overwhelm me with legal pressure and surveillance and volunteers who didn't know any better. But she was making mistakes, lying to county officials, trespassing repeatedly, alienating her own people. Every mistake was ammunition, and I was collecting it all. The game had started 3 days ago with a boat at my dock. Now it was escalating. Lawsuits, surveillance, covert surveys. Linda wanted a war. She was about to discover I'd been preparing for this fight since the day I bought the island. She just didn't know it yet. The Harborview County Clerk's office smelled like old paper and institutional coffee. I'd spent 6 hours here over 2 days, pulling every public record related to Linda Parkwell and the HOA. My eyes burned from reading microfiche and century-old property deeds, but I'd found something. The original Harborview development went back to 1947, a post-war housing project for Boeing workers. 30 waterfront lots carved out of old timberland, sold cheap to veterans who'd helped win the war. The development agreement included shared beach access and a community dock, all clearly defined in the original plat map. Over the decades, the neighborhood evolved. Houses changed hands. Properties got subdivided. In 1992, the homeowners formed an official HOA to manage the community dock and shared spaces. That's when things got interesting. The 1992 HOA charter was straightforward. Manage common areas, collect dues for maintenance, handle disputes between neighbors. Standard stuff. But in 2016, 2 years into Linda's presidency, the charter was amended. New language about expanding community stewardship and optimizing property values through strategic acquisition and development. I photographed every page. The amendment also changed the voting structure. Originally, major decisions required 75% approval from homeowners. The 2016 amendment dropped it to simple majority and gave the HOA president emergency authority to act in the community's best interest without prior approval. Linda had given herself carte blanche. I cross-referenced the amendment date with property transactions. Within 6 months, the HOA had acquired its first non-contiguous property, a small waterfront lot half a mile from Harborview's official boundaries. The seller, a widow named Margaret Ross, had owned it for 40 years. I found the sale price, $180,000. I found the tax assessment from that same year, $425,000. She'd sold for less than half its value. I dug deeper, found a lawsuit filed 2 months before the sale, Harborview HOA versus Ross Family Trust. Complaint alleged the property violated county environmental regulations, caused water quality issues, and constituted a hazard to community welfare. The lawsuit was settled out of court. 1 month later, Margaret Ross sold her property to the HOA. I'd seen this pattern before in my Marine Patrol days. Developers would find elderly property owners, file nuisance lawsuits, then offer to resolve everything by buying the property for pennies on the dollar. It was legal extortion. Linda had been doing it for 8 years. I photographed the Ross case file, then pulled records for the other properties the HOA had acquired, 11 total. Same pattern every time. Lawsuit, settlement, sale at below market value. My phone buzzed. James Thornton. "Tell me you found something good," he said. "Better than good." Linda's been running a systematic property acquisition scheme. Lawsuit, settlement, below market purchase. 11 properties in 8 years. A low whistle. That's a RICO pattern, racketeering. If we can prove it's systematic and coordinated, we can. I've got documentation on all 11 cases. Send me everything. We're filing an amended response with counterclaims, fraud, abuse of process, and intentional interference with property rights. He paused. "Michael, this changes everything. We're not playing defense anymore." After hanging up, I drove to the county environmental office. If Linda had claimed environmental violations in her lawsuits, there should be supporting documentation, surveys, water quality tests, inspection reports. The environmental compliance officer, a woman named Patricia who looked like she'd been working there since the office opened, pulled up the records. Harborview HOA has filed 17 environmental complaints in the past 8 years, she said, scrolling through her database. That's unusual. Most HOAs file 1 or 2 over a decade. How many were substantiated? She clicked through several screens. 3 resulted in compliance orders. The rest were either unfounded or the property owner remediated before we could investigate. "Can I get copies of all 17 complaints?" "Sure, but it'll take a few days. That's a lot of documents." "I'll wait." While Patricia processed my request, I reviewed the 3 substantiated violations. 1 involved illegal dumping, legitimate. 1 was an unpermitted dock extension, also legitimate. The 3rd was a failed septic system. But the other 14 complaints, all filed against properties that later sold to the HOA, every single one. Patricia handed me a receipt. "Should be ready by Friday. That'll be $170 for copying fees." I paid and drove back to the island. The sun was setting as I unlocked my dock gate and climbed into my boat for the short trip home. My phone buzzed halfway across the channel. Susan Chen, the HOA volunteer who'd apologized. "Can we talk? I have information you need to see." I called her. "Immediately." "I'm probably breaking about a dozen confidentiality agreements," Susan said, "but I don't care anymore. Linda's planning something bigger than just your island." "I'm listening." "There's a development company called Pacific Waterfront Holdings. They've been meeting with Linda for the past 6 months. I saw the proposals in her office. They want to turn all the HOA-owned waterfront property into a private marina and resort complex. Your island is the centerpiece." My hands tightened on the wheel. "A resort. High-end moorage, restaurant, event space. The development company is offering the HOA a 20-year lease at $2 million annually, but they need your island to make it work. It's the only deep-water access point that doesn't require dredging. So Linda's not just empire building. She's setting up a revenue stream. A huge one. She's been telling board members that if we can resolve the island situation, every homeowner's property value will increase by 6 figures. Most people don't ask questions when you're promising them money. "Susan, would you be willing to testify to this? Provide documentation?" A long pause. "If it comes to that, yes." "Linda lied to me. To all of us. She said you were blocking community improvements. She never mentioned you were protecting your legal property rights. I need copies of anything you have, emails, meeting minutes, proposals from Pacific Waterfront Holdings. I'll see what I can do. But Michael, be careful. Linda knows I've been asking questions. She's paranoid about leaks." After we hung up, I sat in my boat, engine idling, staring across the dark water at my island. This wasn't about HOA jurisdiction or maritime access rights or environmental surveys. This was about $2 million a year. Linda had spent 8 years building an empire of acquired properties, all leading to this, turning Harborview's waterfront into a commercial development, with my island as the crown jewel, and she'd been willing to lie, sue, and intimidate to make it happen. I thought about Margaret Ross, forced to sell her family property for half its value, about the Patterson family, litigated into submission, about 11 families who'd lost their waterfront homes to Linda's scheme. My phone buzzed again. Email from James. County attorney is reviewing your documentation. If even half of this holds up, Linda Parkwell is facing serious legal consequences. Criminal fraud, possibly. We're meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. I started my boat and headed home through the darkness. The island's lights were visible now. Solar panels Dale had installed powering the house. Security cameras recording everything. Motion sensors waiting. Linda thought she'd cornered me. Thought a lawsuit and pressure campaign would force me to sell like all the others. She had no idea I'd spent the last week documenting her entire operation. No idea that Susan Chen was ready to turn witness. No idea that every trespassing incident, every threatening email, every surveillance boat was being recorded and cataloged. Most importantly, she had no idea that I wasn't one of her elderly victims. I was a deputy sheriff with investigation training, a tech entrepreneur with resources, and someone who'd spent 3 years preparing for exactly this kind of fight. Tomorrow, I'd meet with James and the county attorney. We'd turn defense into offense. But tonight, standing on my dock looking across the dark channel toward Harborview Estates, I felt something I hadn't felt since that first morning confrontation. Anticipation. Linda wanted a war over my island. She was about to get one. And this time, she was playing against someone who knew exactly how to win. Linda's next move came 48 hours after my meeting with the county attorney. I was installing additional security cameras on the North Shore. Susan Chen had warned me Linda was exploring all options when 3 boats appeared on the horizon. Not small patrol boats this time. These were full-size cruisers, the kind wealthy homeowners kept at Harborview's marina. They positioned themselves in a loose perimeter around my island, maybe 100 yards offshore, just outside the legal boundary of my property, but close enough to make a statement. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. Mr. Donovan. Male voice. Polished. Confident. This is Gregory Hartman, Pacific Waterfront Holdings. I believe it's time we had a conversation. I watched the boats through my binoculars. People on deck. Cameras. One boat had what looked like surveying equipment. You're trespassing in my privacy, I said. We're in public waters, Mr. Donovan, completely legal, just as it's legal for us to conduct maritime surveys in accordance with county regulations. A pause. But I didn't call to argue boundaries. I called because I think we can help each other. I doubt that. Hear me out. Pacific Waterfront Holdings is prepared to offer you $4.5 million for your island, 50% above your purchase price. Cash, closing within 30 days. His voice took on a sympathetic tone. I understand you're in litigation with Harborview HOA. Legal battles are expensive and stressful. We're offering you an elegant exit. Not interested. Mr. Donovan, I've developed 17 waterfront properties in Puget Sound over 20 years. I know how this ends. Either you sell now on favorable terms, or you spend 2 years fighting lawsuits while your property becomes unresellable. By the time litigation concludes, we'll acquire it through foreclosure for a fraction of today's offer. That's an interesting threat disguised as business advice. It's reality. The HOA has resources you can't match. Linda Parkwell is highly motivated, and frankly, your property is the only thing standing between us and a $30 million development. His voice hardened slightly. $4.5 million. Think about it, because the next offer will be lower. He hung up. I lowered my phone, still watching the boats. They weren't doing anything overtly illegal, but their presence was a message. We're watching, we're documenting, we're not going away. My phone buzzed again. This time, James Thornton. Have you seen it? He asked. Seen what? Check the Harborview community website. Linda just posted a public statement. I pulled it up on my laptop. Featured post, updated an hour ago. Community update, addressing safety concerns. Dear Harborview residents, as many of you know, Harborview HOA has been working diligently to address safety and environmental concerns related to private properties in our waterfront area. Unfortunately, one property owner has consistently refused to cooperate with reasonable community surveys and compliance checks. After consulting with environmental experts and county officials, we have growing concerns about potential hazards including unpermitted structures, water quality impact, and fire risk to nearby properties. The property owner has responded with hostility, including threats and intimidation of HOA volunteers. Your safety is our top priority. We are pursuing all legal remedies to ensure this situation is resolved appropriately. Please report any suspicious activity to the HOA office immediately. Linda Parkwell, President. I read it twice, feeling my anger crystallize into something cold and focused. She's turning the community against you, James said, making you the villain. Every word is a lie. Every word is liability. She's published defamatory statements claiming you're a safety hazard. We can sue for that. Add it to the counterclaim. Already done. But Michael, this is about more than lawsuits now. She's building public pressure. If she can convince 200 homeowners you're dangerous, that's 200 potential witnesses saying they feared for their safety. I looked back at the boats, still circling. They're not giving up. No, they're escalating. That afternoon, a county inspector appeared at my dock. Official truck, clipboard, camera. Michael Donovan, I'm here for a compliance inspection. We received multiple complaints about unpermitted structures and potential environmental violations. I recognized the pattern immediately. Linda had filed official complaints to force a government inspection. If the inspector found anything wrong, she'd use it in court to prove her safety. Concerns were legitimate. I'd like to see the complaints, I said. That's not how it works. I just need to conduct the inspection. Then I'd like to see your warrant or court order authorizing entry to my property. He frowned. I don't need a warrant for environmental compliance checks. Yes, you do. This is private property. Unless you have probable cause or a court order, I'm within my rights to refuse entry. If you refuse, I'll note it in my report. That doesn't look good. Note whatever you want, but you're not coming onto my property without proper legal authorization. He stood there for a long moment, then took a photo of my dock gate and left. 20 minutes later, James called again. County inspector just filed a report stating you refused compliance inspection. Linda will use this to argue you're hiding violations. I know, but if I let him on my property without a warrant, anything he finds becomes admissible evidence, even things unrelated to Linda's complaints. Better to force her to get a court order. Risky strategy. So is letting an inspector roam around, looking for technical violations. That evening, as the sun set and the boats finally dispersed, I sat on my deck reviewing the day's surveillance footage. The boats had circled for 6 hours straight, documenting, photographing, creating a record of their presence. My phone buzzed. Email from Susan Chen with attachments. Meeting minutes from last week's HOA board session. Linda told the board Pacific Waterfront Holdings needs to close the island acquisition by August, or the financing falls through. She's under deadline pressure. That's why she's escalating. I opened the attachments. Internal HOA communications, development timelines, financial projections showing the marina development couldn't proceed without my island. The water depth around it was the only viable location for the deep water docks the resort needed. One email from Linda to Gregory Hartman stood out. The Donovan problem needs to be resolved by end of July. If he won't sell, we'll need to pursue aggressive litigation to force foreclosure. Time is critical. She'd written that 3 weeks ago, before the first confrontation on my dock. This entire campaign had been planned in advance. I forwarded everything to James with a note. Linda's working against a deadline. Development company needs the island by August. That's our leverage. His response came back immediately. File for injunction first thing Monday. If we can delay her litigation, we run out the clock on the development deal. I looked across the channel at Harborview. Lights were on in dozens of houses. People making dinner, watching TV, living their lives. Most probably believed Linda's story about safety concerns and environmental violations. They had no idea their HOA president was running a criminal property acquisition scheme to profit from a development deal. My phone buzzed one more time. Text from an unknown number. Drop the lawsuits and sell, or things get worse. This is your last warning. No signature. But the area code matched Harborview. I screenshotted the text and forwarded it to James and Sheriff Hendricks. Then I walked to my equipment shed and pulled out something I'd installed 2 years ago but never activated. A full recording system for all phone calls and messages to my number. I'd set it up after my divorce, when my ex-wife's lawyers had tried to use my words against me in court. If Linda wanted to play dirty with threats and intimidation, I'd document every single word. The boats returned the next morning, and the morning after that, always just outside my property line, always visible, always watching. On the fourth day, I noticed something new. A drone, high altitude, circling my island in a grid pattern. Aerial surveillance. I called the FAA to file a complaint about unauthorized drone flights over private property. The agent told me I needed to identify the operator first. That evening, I used a telephoto lens to photograph the drone on its next pass. Then I used software from my tech days to enhance the image. The serial number was visible on the undercarriage. I ran it through the FAA's drone registry database. Registered owner, Pacific Waterfront Holdings. Gregory Hartman's company was surveying my property from the air. I documented everything and sent it to James. They're building a development plan using aerial survey data. This proves the environmental complaints are pretextual. His response? Perfect. This is harassment, not legitimate business activity. We'll amend the counterclaim again. But that night, lying in bed listening to the waves, I understood something troubling. Linda wasn't backing down. Neither was Pacific Waterfront Holdings. They had millions at stake and a deadline. Every day that passed made them more desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. But they also became dangerous. I got up and checked my security cameras. All clear. The boats were gone. The water was dark and empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that Linda and Gregory Hartman were planning something bigger than surveillance and legal pressure, something that would force my hand before their August deadline. I just didn't know what yet. The fire marshal showed up on July 15th, exactly 6 weeks before Pacific Waterfront's development deadline. I was repairing the boathouse roof when his boat pulled up to my dock. Official vessel, county markings, 2 inspectors in uniform. Michael Donovan, we need to conduct an immediate fire safety inspection. Multiple reports of hazardous conditions on your property. I climbed down from the roof, keeping my voice calm. Multiple reports from who? We received 7 calls in the past 3 days, concerns about fuel storage, electrical systems, and fire access. He held up a tablet showing a map of my island. Your property is in a wildfire risk zone. State law allows emergency safety inspections. This was different from the environmental inspector. Fire safety fell under immediate public danger. They could inspect without a warrant if they had reasonable cause. I'd like to see the specific complaints. He pulled them up, all filed anonymously through the county website, all claiming to have seen smoke, fuel spills, or electrical hazards on my property. All lies. But lies that gave the fire marshal legal cover to inspect. Fine, I said. Inspect whatever you need, but I'm documenting everything. I followed them around the island for 2 hours, recording on my phone as they checked my generator shed, fuel storage, electrical panel, and fire suppression system. Everything Dale had built was over-engineered and meticulously maintained. Everything I'd added met or exceeded code. They found nothing. Your property is actually in better shape than most, the lead inspector admitted. Whoever filed those complaints was either mistaken or lying, I finished. He didn't disagree. After they left, I called James. Fire marshal just inspected, found nothing, but Linda got 7 people to file false reports. 7 different people? 7 anonymous complaints. I'm guessing she coached them on what to say. That's conspiracy to file false reports. Criminal. A pause. Michael, she's getting reckless. That's good for us legally, but it means she's under serious pressure. Watch yourself. That night, I reviewed the surveillance footage from the past week. The patrol boats had stopped circling. The aerial drone hadn't returned. For 3 days, there'd been no activity around the island at all. It felt wrong. Linda had been escalating steadily for weeks, then suddenly went quiet. I checked the HOA website. No new posts. I checked county records. No new legal filings. It was like she'd vanished. At 2 a.m., my phone's security app woke me with an alert. Motion detected, South Shore. I pulled up the camera feed. 3 figures in dark clothing, moving through the woods with flashlights. Not HOA volunteers this time. These people moved with purpose and coordination. I grabbed my badge, my phone, and a flashlight, then headed out the back door silently. The motion sensors tracked them as they moved toward my main house. They were carrying equipment, backpacks, what looked like cameras or sensors, something else I couldn't identify. I circled through the woods, staying downwind, using the terrain I'd learned over 3 years. By the time they reached my house, I was positioned behind them with a clear view and video recording. They stopped at my electrical panel. One of them opened it with tools. Another pulled out what looked like a thermal camera. The third took photographs with a high-end DSLR. "This is the main junction," one whispered. "Get documentation of the connect."
Hands where I can see them! You're done! I said freeze! I have a badge and I'm recording this!
"Sheriff's Department, don't move." They froze. For a second, nobody breathed. Then one of them ran. I didn't chase him. I had 2 others and a clear video recording. I held up my badge. "You're trespassing on private property and tampering with electrical systems. Both of you, on the ground, now." The woman dropped immediately. The man with the camera looked like he was considering running, then slowly knelt. "We're just doing a survey," the woman said. "We have permission from Linda Parkwell, I know. I called Sheriff Hendricks while keeping my light on them. This is Deputy Donovan. I've got 2 suspects in custody for criminal trespass and attempted sabotage. Need a patrol boat at my location." "Michael?" Hendricks sounded fully awake despite the hour. "What happened?" "Caught them trying to tamper with my electrical panel, creating false evidence of code violations. It's on video." "Jesus. Okay, Collins is on patrol tonight. I'll redirect him to your location. Sit tight." The Marine patrol boat arrived 20 minutes later. Deputy Collins, who I'd worked with 5 years ago, took custody of both suspects while I downloaded the surveillance footage to his laptop. "You're sure they were manufacturing evidence?" Collins asked. "Positive. Watch this section." I showed him the footage of them opening my electrical panel with tools, taking photos with the panel cover removed to make connections look exposed. "They're creating the appearance of code violations." Collins shook his head. "This is felony property tampering. Who hired them?" "I've got a good idea, but I need you to question them officially." He did. The woman broke first. Her name was Jennifer Martinez, and she worked for a property documentation company called Cascade Inspections. She'd been hired by an intermediary to document safety violations at my address. "Who hired you?" "I don't know. We got the job through our website. Payment was wired in advance." "Who gave you access codes to the property?" A long pause. "The client said the owner had given permission. We thought this was a legitimate inspection." Collins looked at me. "You didn't give permission." "Never. They were hired to create false evidence." By the time Collins left with the suspects, it was 5 a.m. The sun was starting to rise, painting the water pink and gold. My phone rang. "James Thornton. Sheriff Hendricks just called me. He said you caught people tampering with your property." I explained everything. "That's it," James said. "That's the mistake we've been waiting for. Hiring people to manufacture evidence crosses the line from aggressive litigation into criminal conspiracy. If we can prove Linda paid for this." Collins is questioning them now. The company they work for will have records of payment. "I'm filing an emergency motion first thing this morning, asking the court to freeze all HOA activities pending investigation of criminal conduct." His voice had an edge of satisfaction. "Michael, we just shifted from defense to offense. Linda's going to have to explain to a judge why people she hired were caught on your property at 2 a.m. tampering with electrical systems." After we hung up, I walked down to my dock and sat watching the sunrise. 3 months ago, Linda had appeared at my dock with confidence and entitlement, certain she could bully me into compliance. Since then, she'd filed lawsuits, organized surveillance, published defamatory statements, filed false reports, and hired people to manufacture evidence against me. Every move had been documented, every lie recorded, every crime captured on video. She'd been so focused on taking my island that she never considered the possibility that I was stronger prepared, better documented, and more patient than her previous victims. My phone buzzed. Email from Susan Chen. Emergency HOA board meeting called for 9 a.m. Linda is addressing serious legal concerns. I'll try to record it. I smiled. Linda wanted one last move before everything collapsed. I was ready. The Harborview County Courthouse was built in 1932, all marble columns and cedar panels, designed to intimidate anyone walking through its doors. I'd been here a dozen times during my sheriff's years, mostly testifying in marine violation cases. This time, I was a plaintiff. The emergency hearing was scheduled for 2 p.m. on July 18th. James had filed motions for restraining orders, sanctions, and a full investigation into HOA misconduct. The criminal charges against Jennifer Martinez and her partner were still pending, but Collins had gotten enough from their interrogation to connect Cascade Inspections to a shell company that traced back to Pacific Waterfront Holdings. Gregory Hartman had paid for the tampering. Linda had provided my property details and access routes. "This is going to get ugly," James warned me outside the courtroom. "Linda's bringing a full legal team. She's going to argue everything was legitimate HOA business and you're a hostile property owner who overreacted. Let her argue. We've got documentation." "We do, but judges don't like property disputes. They tend to push for settlement." He looked at me seriously. "If she offers to drop everything and leave you alone, I recommend taking it. No settlement. I want her on record. I want the court to see exactly what she's been doing." James nodded slowly. "Okay, then let's go to war." The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and intimate. Judge Margaret Ochoa presided, stern, 60-something, with a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. Linda sat at the defendant's table with 3 lawyers in expensive suits. She'd dressed conservatively, looking every bit the responsible community leader. When our eyes met, her expression was pleasant, confident. She still thought she'd win. "This is case number 2024 CV 8847, Judge Ochoa began. "Donovan versus Harborview HOA. Mr. Thornton, you've filed emergency motions. Let's hear them." James stood. "Your Honor, we're asking for immediate restraining orders preventing further HOA activities targeting my client's property. Over the past 2 months, Mr. Donovan has been subjected to systematic harassment, defamation, and criminal acts, all orchestrated by the defendant HOA and its president, Linda Parkwell." Linda's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Richard Crest, stood immediately. "Your Honor, that's an inflammatory characterization of routine HOA community management. My client has followed all appropriate procedures to address legitimate safety and environmental concerns." "Let me see the evidence," Judge Ochoa said. James opened his laptop and connected to the courtroom display. "I'll start with the first incident. June 3, 2024. Mrs. Parkwell and an HOA crew arrived at Mr. Donovan's private island claiming to conduct an environmental survey. They had no permits, no authorization, and no right to access the property. He played the surveillance video. The courtroom watched Linda step onto my dock, refuse to leave, threaten legal action. Mr. Donovan identified himself as a commissioned deputy sheriff and asked them to leave. They eventually complied. But notice Mrs. Parkwell's final statement. He replayed the audio. "This isn't over. You just made a very big mistake." "That's a threat," James said. "The beginning of a coordinated campaign." Richard Crest stood again. "Your Honor, Mrs. Parkwell's statement reflects frustration with an uncooperative property owner, nothing more. The HOA had legitimate reasons to survey that waterway." "What legitimate reasons?" Judge Ochoa asked. "The HOA's maritime boundaries include waters within a half-mile of Harborview properties. Mr. Donovan's island sits within that zone. Do you have legal precedent for that claim?" A pause. We believe the original development agreement supports it. Belief isn't precedent, Mr. Crest. Judge Ochoa turned to James. Continue. James showed the pattern. The lawsuits filed against previous property owners, the below-market sales, the 11 properties acquired through litigation. This is systematic, James said. Mrs. Parkwell has been running a property acquisition scheme for 8 years. My client is her latest target. He showed the emails from Susan Chen, the development deal with Pacific Waterfront Holdings, the August deadline, the $2 million annual lease agreement. Linda's face had gone very still. Your Honor, this isn't about community safety, James said. This is about profit. Mrs. Parkwell wants my client's island because she's signed a deal to turn all HOA property into a commercial resort. The development company needs Mr. Donovan's deep water access to make the project viable. When he wouldn't sell, she launched a harassment campaign to force him out. That's completely speculative, Richard Crest said, but his voice had lost its confidence. Is it? James pulled up the emails between Linda and Gregory Hartman. These are authenticated communications showing explicit coordination. Here's Mrs. Parkwell telling the developer that the Donovan problem needs to be resolved by end of July. Here's the developer offering increasingly aggressive acquisition tactics. He showed the false fire safety reports, the anonymous complaints, the surveillance boats and aerial drones. And finally, James said, 3 days ago, my client caught 2 people hired by Pacific Waterfront Holdings, attempting to tamper with his electrical panel to manufacture code violations. They've been arrested and charged with criminal property tampering. One has already provided a statement implicating the developer and, indirectly, the HOA. Judge Ochoa was leaning forward now, reading the documents on her screen. Mr. Crest, did your client coordinate with Pacific Waterfront Holdings to harass Mr. Donovan into selling his property? Richard Crest glanced at Linda, who was whispering urgently. Your Honor, my client may have had discussions with developers about community enhancement projects, but that doesn't constitute. Did she hire people to file false complaints? That's unclear. It's very clear, Judge Ochoa said sharply. I've reviewed the fire marshal's report. 7 anonymous complaints, all filed within 3 days, all claiming to witness violations that didn't exist. Someone organized that campaign. She turned to Linda directly. Mrs. Parkwell, did you encourage HOA members to file false reports about Mr. Donovan's property? Linda stood. She'd regained her composure, and her voice was steady. Your Honor, I encouraged community members to report safety concerns. If some of those reports were mistaken, 7 identical reports, all anonymous, all false. That's not mistakes. That's coordination. Judge Ochoa closed her laptop. Here's what I see. An HOA president with a financial interest in acquiring a specific property, a pattern of aggressive litigation against previous owners, a development deal contingent on obtaining that property, and escalating. Harassment when the owner refused to comply. Your Honor, Richard Crest started. I'm not finished. Judge Ochoa's voice cut like a blade. Mr. Donovan has documented everything. Video evidence of trespassing, recordings of threats, emails proving the development deal, criminal charges against people hired by the developer. This isn't a property dispute. This is systematic harassment. She looked at the motion papers. I'm granting the restraining order, effective immediately. Harborview HOA and its representatives are prohibited from accessing Mr. Donovan's property, conducting surveillance, filing complaints without substantiation, or making any public statements about Mr. Donovan or his property. Violation will result in contempt charges. Linda's face had gone white. Additionally, Judge Ochoa continued, I'm referring this matter to the county prosecutor for investigation of conspiracy to commit property fraud. Mrs. Parkwell, you may want to retain criminal counsel. The courtroom was silent. We're adjourned. Judge Ochoa stood and left. Outside the courthouse, James was grinning. That was better than I hoped. Ochoa doesn't grant restraining orders lightly. The fact that she referred Linda for criminal investigation means she saw clear evidence of wrongdoing. What happens now? Linda's campaign is over. She can't contact you, can't file complaints, can't do anything without violating the restraining order. And if the prosecutor moves forward, she's facing fraud charges. He shook my hand. You won, Michael. You protected your island. I looked across the street toward the harbor. Water sparkling in the afternoon sun, boats drifting in the current. I'd won, but it didn't feel like victory yet. My phone buzzed. Susan Chen. Emergency HOA board meeting tonight. Linda's stepping down as president. People are furious. Some want criminal charges. Others want to dissolve the entire board. It's chaos. I showed the message to James. That's the fallout, he said. 11 families who lost property to Linda's scheme. 200 homeowners who just discovered their HOA president was running a fraud operation. Pacific Waterfront Holdings facing criminal conspiracy charges. This is going to reshape the entire community. Good, I said. I drove back to the marina and took my boat home. The water was calm, the evening warm. As I approached my island, I felt something release in my chest. Tension I'd been carrying for 2 months without realizing it. My dock, my island, my home, still mine, still protected. I tied up the boat and climbed to my house. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and amber. I stood on my deck and looked across the channel toward Harborview. Lights were coming on in the houses, people living their lives, now dealing with the revelation that their HOA president had been lying to them for years. My phone rang. Sheriff Hendricks. Heard about the court ruling. Congratulations. Thanks. Is Collins moving forward with the criminal investigation? He is, and the prosecutor's interested. Linda Parkwell might be facing serious charges. A pause. But Michael, watch yourself for the next few weeks. People don't like losing, especially not publicly. Linda's lost her position, her reputation, and potentially her freedom. Some people get dangerous when they're cornered. I'll be careful. After we hung up, I checked my security cameras. All clear, no boats approaching, no movement in the woods. For the first time in 2 months, my island was quiet. I sat on my deck until full dark, watching stars emerge over the water, thinking about Dale Hoffman, who'd built this place and protected it for 40 years. Thinking about my dad, who taught me that some things were worth fighting for, even when the fight seemed impossible. Thinking about Linda Parkwell, who'd underestimated the man she was trying to bully. Tomorrow, the legal aftermath would begin. Depositions, prosecutor meetings, civil suits from the families Linda had defrauded. It would take months, maybe years, to fully unravel her scheme. But tonight, I just sat in the quiet and listened to the waves. My island, my home, my peace. Still here, still protected, still mine. 6 months after the courthouse hearing, I stood on my dock watching the sunrise. Winter had settled over Puget Sound. Cold mornings, frost on the dock planks, eagles perched in bare trees waiting for the salmon run. The water was steel gray and still. Across the channel, Harborview Estates looked different. The HOA office had closed down 3 months ago, replaced by a new community board with actual oversight and term limits. Linda Parkwell had pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud and was serving 18 months in county lockup. Gregory Hartman and Pacific Waterfront Holdings were facing civil suits from 11 families they'd helped Linda defraud. The resort development was dead. The $2 million dream collapsed the day the criminal charges were filed. My phone buzzed. Email from James Thornton. Final settlement approved by judge. You're receiving $340,000 in damages from HOA insurance, plus legal fees. All restrictions lifted. You're officially, completely, legally clear. I read it twice, then put my phone away and looked at my island. 3 years ago, I'd bought this place for peace, for isolation, for the last place in 100 miles where nobody could tell me what to do. Instead, I'd found a battle. But I'd also found something else, the knowledge that some things were worth fighting for, that bullies could be beaten if you were patient and meticulous, that justice still existed if you were willing to work for it. My phone rang, unknown number. I considered not answering, then did anyway. Mr. Donovan? A woman's voice, elderly, hesitant. My name is Margaret Ross. I heard what happened with Linda Parkwell, how you stopped her. The name hit me, Margaret Ross, the first property owner Linda had forced to sell, the widow who'd lost her waterfront home for half its value. I remember your case, I said. I'm sorry for what she did to you. Don't be sorry. I called to thank you. Her voice strengthened. I lost my home because I didn't know how to fight back. I was 76 years old, alone, and Linda made me believe I had no choice. But you fought. You documented everything. You exposed her. A pause. Because of you, 10 other families are getting restitution. Some are even buying back their properties. I hadn't known that. They're getting their homes back? Some of them. The HOA dissolved Linda's acquisitions as part of the fraud settlement. It won't undo everything, but it's something. More than we had before you stood up to her. After we hung up, I sat on my dock for a long time, thinking about Margaret Ross and the Patterson family and all the others who'd lost their homes because one person had too much power and not enough oversight. I'd protected my island, but by doing so, I'd helped them protect their homes too. That felt more important than the settlement money or the court victory. That felt like justice. Susan Chen visited in March, bringing homemade soup and news about Harborview's restructuring. The new board is completely different, she said, sitting on my deck overlooking the water. Term limits, financial audits, community votes on major decisions. Everything Linda should have done but didn't. You're on the new board, I guessed. She smiled. Vice president. People wanted someone who'd spoken up against Linda. I'm still not sure I'm qualified, but I'm trying. You'll do great. She looked across the water at the island's forest. Linda used to talk about this place like it was a prize she deserved, like your refusal to sell was a personal insult. Susan shook her head. She never understood that some things aren't for sale. That home matters more than property values. Dale Hoffman told me this island needed someone who understood what she was, I said. I didn't fully get it then, but I do now. What is she? I thought about 3 years of sunrises and storms and silent mornings, about the day I almost lost it all to someone who saw real estate instead of home. She's the last place in 100 miles where nobody can tell you what to do, I said. Worth protecting. Susan smiled. You sound like Dale. I'll take that as a compliment. By summer, the surveillance cameras came down. I didn't need them anymore. No boats circled my shoreline. No drones surveyed from above. No trespassers appeared in the woods. The island returned to what it had been before Linda, quiet, private, mine. I spent August replacing the boathouse deck, the project I'd started the morning Linda first appeared at my dock. This time, nobody interrupted. I worked at my own pace, enjoying the physical labor, the smell of cedar, the satisfaction of building something with my own hands. Dale would have approved. My phone rang one afternoon while I was measuring planks. Sheriff Hendricks. Donovan. Got a situation I could use your input on. Private property dispute, marine access issues, owners being pressured by a development company. Sounds familiar? I smiled. You want me to talk to them? If you're willing. Guy's overwhelmed. Could use advice from someone who's been through it. Send me his contact. Info. I'll reach out. After we hung up, I looked at the half-finished deck, then across the water toward Harborview. The channel sparkled in afternoon light. Sailboats drifted on the current. From here, it looked peaceful and perfect. But I knew now that peace required vigilance. That perfect places needed protection. I'd learned that the hard way. And maybe, I thought, that knowledge was worth sharing. The September afternoon was warm, one of those perfect Pacific Northwest days where summer holds on before autumn arrives. I was reading on my deck when a boat appeared on the horizon, not threatening, just moving slowly along the channel. It came closer, then stopped maybe 200 yards out. Someone stood at the bow with binoculars, looking at my island. For a moment, old instincts tensed. Then I relaxed. This wasn't surveillance. This was someone admiring the view. The boat turned and headed away. I watched it go, feeling something settle. For months, every boat had been a potential threat. Every stranger, a possible agent for Linda's campaign. Now it was just a boat, just someone enjoying the water. That night, I sat on my dock after sunset, feet dangling over the edge, watching stars emerge. 3 years ago, I'd bought this island to escape, to find peace after years of grinding corporate stress and legal battles and the weight of responsibility. Instead, I'd found purpose, not just protecting my own home, but helping others protect theirs. Not just fighting Linda Parkwell, but exposing a system that let people like her abuse power for years. The water lapped gently against the dock pilings. An owl called from the forest. The air smelled like cedar and salt. My island, my home, my peace, worth every fight, worth every document, worth every hour spent gathering evidence and building the case that finally stopped Linda's campaign. Dale had been right. This place needed someone who understood what she was, and now, finally, after everything I did, the last place in 100 miles where nobody could tell me what to do. The last piece of private paradise in a world that wanted to turn everything into profit. The island I'd fought for, protected, kept, mine. 5 years after Linda Parkwell's conviction, a real estate magazine ran a feature story about property rights and HOA abuse in Pacific Northwest waterfront communities. They interviewed me for 20 minutes about the case. At the end, the reporter asked, "Do you ever regret buying the island, given everything that happened?" I thought about that morning 5 years ago when Linda first appeared at my dock, about the months of surveillance and legal pressure and threats, about standing in that courtroom watching justice finally prevail. "No," I said, "not for a second." "Why not?" "Because some things are worth fighting for, and this island taught me I still had fight left in me." The article ran with a photo of my island taken from the water. Dense forest, rocky shoreline, my craftsman house visible through the trees. The caption read, "The last private island in Harborview County, protected by law, defended by determination." I framed it and hung it in my workshop right next to the brass skeleton key Dale Hoffman had given me the day I bought this place. A reminder, a trophy, a promise. This island was mine. I'd protected it once, I'd protect it again if I had to, but mostly I just lived here, in the quiet, in the peace, in the last place in 100 miles where nobody could tell me what to do. Home. If you'd fight back the same way, let me know, because sometimes the most important battles are the ones we fight not just for ourselves, but for everyone who comes after. Property rights matter, home matters, and nobody, not HOA presidents, not developers, not anyone, gets to take that from you. The Island Keeper won, and so can you.